So just like the process of sewing this facing into this neck should have felt a lot like what things felt for you when you did the, what did you do? You did a facing in the final skirt in 1A. So just like that, like what we did here felt familiar, this next part is going to feel similarly familiar. Grabbing some scissors off my pegboard and knocking all my pegs down. Because my daughter took my fabric scissors off my table to go work on her graduation dress. Okay, so I'm gonna, actually, you know what? Before I clip anything, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna turn this right side out as best I can, right? Because I got a big lump in there that I have to deal with. It should not be that fat. But what I want to do before I cut anything is I want to check and make sure that when I zip this up, my neck is aligned. Because if not, that would be really sad. If I cut it first, if I didn't cut it first, no big deal. I can just adjust one of the seams. Okay. Let's see. Oof, they're really fat. But I think they're going to line up. This one might be a little higher, huh? Let's just make sure. This one feels so thick. No, I think they're going to line up. Okay, so once it looks like they're going to line up, then we can start clipping and grading and doing all that fun stuff. So I'll pop it back inside out so it's the way it was when I sewed it. And then we'll very carefully trim away this extra zipper stuff right here. I'm really close to my stitch line there. I usually put my fingernail over my stitch line just to make sure that I don't cut through it, because I don't want a hole there. But I do need to get close. So then, usually what we do is we grade the seam allowance that is closest to the, it's the facing seam allowance that we grade. So I'm just feeling mine. Okay, so it seems like it will be very important for me to grade the seam allowances where I have seams. So I'm trimming away the seam allowance by this shoulder seam here. So just the facing seam allowance. I'm leaving the dress seam allowance there. And then over here at this, what is that? That's the center front seam. I'm going to trim away the seam allowance from the facing at the center front seam. And I'll just even this one out. But I'm not trimming the dress seam allowance because I want the dress seam allowance to be able to come over and cover up the facing seam allowance. So I'll go to the other side of the center front. And I will hold the dress seam allowance in my hand, like pinch it between my fingers so that I don't cut it, and I will just trim the facing seam allowance. And then I'll come over here to this shoulder seam And I will hold the dress seam allowance in my hand, and I will just clip the facing seam allowance. And then I already clipped this. Okay, so now that I have some of that graded, I'm going to go ahead and just clip my curves very carefully. So right up to my stitch line. I also have a smaller pair of scissors that are great for this, but my daughter also has that. She is working, like I said, on a dress. So I'm just clipping the curves. And then I'm going to flip on my iron so that it's hot by the time I'm done with this. So I'm going to have my seam allowance go towards the facing. I think I need to turn it this way because I'm going to have my iron come at it this way. So that'll be easier for me to hold it if I have it turned like this. So I'm just kind of feeling where my seam allowance is. And getting set up. And I don't want to do a lot of like hard pressing on this. But I just want it set up to go in the right direction. So again, I'm just using the tip of my iron just to get that seam warm and get the seam allowances to go towards the facing. And then on this side, I think it'll be easier for me to flip it this way. see how far up into this zipper thing I can get. Okay, now that I have this pressed, I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch the seam allowance towards the facing, really close to the seam line, but I'm going to do it on the facing side. So I'm going to be feeling my seam allowance by braille because I won't really be able to see it. So let's go over to the sewing machine